sure enough, they're like, yeah, this is a set of human remains. The coroner comes out, the medical examiner's team comes out, and later on they do find and confirm that it is Letha's body.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Who Killed Letha? Part 1 on the Murder Police Podcast.
Welcome back to the Murder Police Podcast. I'm David. Wendy couldn't make it today. She has that real job, and it's taken her away again. But today, to talk about Letha Rutherford, is I've got two fantastic detectives from the Lexington Police Department that are going to introduce themselves and then give us the bare bones of what this case is, the things that they've seen inside the file, and where we can go from there. So if you don't mind, Travis, you want to tell people who you are?
Sure. Travis Holt. Been at the Lexington Police Department since 2013. Started my law enforcement career in 2009 at another agency. Enjoyed it there. Worked patrol. Worked as a detective. Decided to make the move to Lexington.
Gotcha.
And been there ever since. And I've had several assignments since I've been here. So.
Good deal. What agency did you start at?
Started in Versailles, actually.
What a great place.
Great place.
Not just a great place to live, but that's a great PD. So
it is.
Good bosses and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
So and my friend, tell us who you are.
My name is Brandon Gibbs. I started with the police department in 2013. I graduated college in May of 2013 and started the police academy in November of 2013.
Gotcha. Did y'all come in the same recruit class?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, sir.
It had to be close.
Very close.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, starting, Travis, tell me, what got you interested in death investigations to begin with? Because that's pretty interesting stuff.
It is. Like I said, I was a detective at Versailles. I really liked the investigative work. I liked that side of it, getting to kind of see the whole picture and see it come together. And much of the same when I came to Lexington, started on patrol. It was really interesting to me to see just how it operated at a larger agency with the different units. Didn't take long to become interested in becoming a detective in Lexington. And, going to calls, shots fired calls, a homicide call as a patrol officer and seeing those guys get out of their car and they've got their suits on and, they just get out of the car and they look like they're ready to handle business and figure things out. And I'm like, man, that's what I want to do. Yeah, and developing those relationships with the guys that were in the robbery homicide unit was very impressionable on me. So
I think we all share that, and I tell the story too. I remember when I was a kid growing up in Louisville. I think I knew I wanted to be a cop since I was 6. Billy Richmond would argue I haven't gotten much taller since then, but but I remember unfortunately, like a couple blocks over from my house, there was a guy had taken his own life. And we learned later he'd shot himself on an upper floor. And like you, I remember these men, and back then there was predominantly men, but I remember these men coming out of the house with white shirts and ties with paper bags. And I'm like, they know exactly what we're all out there guessing. We've got no idea. And I think that's that curiosity. And then it folds into finding those answers and everything. But same way here, when I came on, I didn't have any desire to be a detective until I got close to a few. And then I think I got the bug. So, Brandon, tell me, same thing for you. How'd you get into
So, my story is actually very similar to yours. As a kid, age 6 to 8, this is exactly what I knew I wanted to do my whole life. To me, people that handled those type of cases were superheroes as a kid. And I always looked up to the TV shows, to the movies, and pushed myself. That was a dream of mine. So now I'm actually living that. I was fortunate enough, 2 years on in the police department, I got selected to go to a temporary assignment, and that was what we called the Violent Crimes Unit. And I got to work with some veteran detectives that had been there for years, and they guided me and mentored me and molded me into, gave me the opportunities that I had, and I eventually just stayed until I got promoted, and then I was able to come right back. I was just living out a childhood dream, basically.
Yeah, it's so funny how many people I meet that I know when Rob Hart, he came on in my class, and he retired before I did, but we were at his retirement party, and he talked about his AAA crossing guard badge. And I was like, that's the same rush I got when I was in elementary school. Not a power trip or anything, but the idea that you could do something to help other people, which is. And I started on a TDY, temporary duty up in homicide too, that just didn't stop for several years, which was a magical thing. So it's neat for you all to talk about that, because most of the people that watch this show or listen to this show in a true crime thing are the same way. Is there people inside the community that hunger to find answers, and some of the people that we talk and meet to that listen to the show are very gifted lay investigators themselves.
Yeah.
And so we try to educate on that a little bit. So where you're in personal crimes, that's kind of like the big boilerplate. Specifically, where are you guys assigned right now, and what's your role?
So I am currently assigned to the homicide unit, more specifically as the unsolved homicides detective.
Gotcha.
Used to be referred to as cold case.
Thank you.
We always had a cold case investigator. Chris Schoonover obviously was doing that job when I came up to the homicide unit. So we have since changed that name. It's we've talked about this offline, and we think that's a more appropriate title per se for that position. So I'm the unsolved homicides investigator for the police department.
And I love that. I love that, because that whole cold case thing, I would bet $5 that wasn't coined inside of a police department. Or
oh no, probably not.
That was from the outside again. And the thing is, that kind of takes away hope.
Sure.
Right? And we know that I always tell people that it's true that first 48, that first couple of days is pretty significant, but and as frustrating as it is for a family, sometimes time starts to be your friend. And
absolutely.
Maybe in this case, 30 years, some odd years out that we're about to talk to, as it might be too, but got to keep that hope alive.
Absolutely.
Those people that are dealing with this, those survivors, they are in a place that I pray pretty much every day that I don't find myself in. And we got to keep that hope alive too. So, Brandon, what do you do?
So I'm a sergeant assigned to the personal crimes section. Like I said, this is kind of the boilerplate. That is divided into the robbery and homicide unit. And so there are two of us, sergeants, that are assigned to the day shift spot there. And we both supervise directly detectives that are assigned to robberies and as well as homicides.
Fantastic.
So I'm just the first line supervisor for.
That's a big deal. Yeah, it's do you feel a difference when you get into supervision from when you were a detective and actually doing the work?
It's a different perspective for sure. For me, it was hard because I was assigned there as a detective from 2017 to 2022. So I have a lot of personal hands-on experience. So you just kind of have to let them do their job, because there's not one way to solve a case. I'm just there to facilitate and be a resource and give them anything that they need to be as successful as they can be.
I'd work for you in a heartbeat, because I did work for a couple that weren't quite that good. So, yeah, little meddlers and stuff like that.
Well, that's the benefit of having him as a supervisor is, when I came to the unit in 2016 and he came up there, he and I quickly developed a bond and became friends, and we worked almost every murder that we had together. There were obviously other guys that we were number twos on cases and that sort of thing. But if I was up next for the next homicide and I got the phone call, generally most of the time, unless I knew he was out of town, he was the first guy I called. Yeah. Like, hey, we got one. You got to come in. So it's good for me as a detective to know that I can go to this guy as a supervisor, and he's going to know exactly what I'm thinking. He's going to be able to give me sound advice because he himself has been there as a detective. So
100%.
I love having him up there. He's a good superviser.
That's the difference between a leader and a supervisor, by the way, and you're leading. So
he is.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing I do on the side hustle. So it's I always look for that difference. So good stuff there. And because detectives, all cops need autonomy. And the worst thing, nobody wants to be micromanaged. I always say, if you want to be micromanaged, you can pay people online for like 4 hours at a time and get microed in ways we don't want to talk about here. But nobody really wants to be microed in. And the idea that we can all come to a different resolution. Mm-hmm. And the big thing is allowing people to be creative and use their imagination. And especially in unsolved homicides. Yeah. It's because if there's something I think that is a big deal on those when they sit, is a new set of eyes coming and looking at it. And it's not, you all know it's not always critical of other people's work, but sometimes the forest for the trees is a real thing. Mm-hmm. You can get mired down in the details on that too. So excellent work. Sound like a good boss. I'd work for you in a heartbeat.
I think that's the beauty of the unit that we have right now is there's so many different backgrounds and types of people there that bring different things to the table, and that's what makes our team what it is. And like we had said earlier, just because people go a different route to get to the same solution doesn't mean that it was the wrong way.
There we go.
You just have to realize that.
There we go. Yeah, and it's diverse. When I came up, when I came up and visited a couple of weeks ago and walked through that bay, I didn't know who any of those people were. Of course, like when I left, me and Dwayne Holman were tied for fourth in seniority, and it'll happen to y'all one day. You're like, when did that shit happen? I mean, it's like, I'm not that old, am I? Yeah, I'm that old. So, but enjoy it, because I always tell people, and the people listening have heard this 1,000 times, that in 28 years, that assignment was the one that meant the most to me. Mm-hmm. And in that little badge case up there, I've got a significant collection of badges, as I say. Yeah. And the one it means, the one is that I've got the one copy of it that says detective and stuff like that. So eat it up and soak it up. And I'm glad you got back into it.
Me too.
That's a big deal. Me too. So talk about unsolved. And while we're here today is, we're big on social media. And I remember reaching out to a young woman here in this community called Hannah Hafley, who had started a post about a unsolved homicide from Lexington from about 32 years ago on Letha Rutherford. And I remember seeing her sharing information, and I keyed into it because, blast from the past, is I remember being in the police academy in early 93, and having the original case detective on Letha's case come and talk to the class and share. That was Lynn Dalton, who is now Lynn Thompson, a fantastic detective who's retired now. But I've never forgotten that when Lynn came in to talk about that case and shared the broad details on it, how she was emotionally attached to it, and emotionally attached to a very young woman that lost her life, and talked about the complexities of the environment and all that is involved in this case that people will learn of. So when I saw Hannah post that, I was like, oh, wow. So I reached out and I said, would you like to talk about that? Because here's the other thing, aside from maybe a news channel covering it several years ago, it's been dormant. And usually cases like that you see a little bit more on. So I thought, okay, we're overdue. And that's when I hit you all up and hit your bosses up. And again, thank you for coming and talking about it and to share that. So if y'all want to kind of walk through what we know about Letha, because I know in the broad picture of things is we have a young lady that disappears, and then she's found. Yes. And we wind up with an unsolved murder. So to the best of your ability, you want to walk us through that.
Yeah. And just to kind of touch on that, there's cases where so much time has went by, it's good that people are still around, that are still willing to come forward and post things, not only to draw our attention to possible leads and witnesses and that sort of thing, but people in the community. And I think that's why we're here talking about this today. So, so Letha Rutherford, she was an 18-year-old female resident of Fayette County, lived out in the county, Dry Branch Road. It's pretty far south out into the county, kind of a rural area. Family reports her missing in December of 1991. Letha was last seen at the house there on Dry Branch Road by family, and then is just gone. So it initially starts out as a missing persons investigation. Right. So from December of 91 until April of 92, it's just that. It's a missing persons investigation. So detectives are working at, trying to find Letha where she's at. And then ultimately in April of 92, her body's discovered out on the property there on Dry Branch. So then it goes from a missing persons investigation to a homicide investigation. And other detectives got involved, forensics came out, photographed the scene, that sort of thing. And then ultimately Letha goes for autopsy for, examination and that sort of thing. So that kind of gets that aspect of the homicide investigation started, which, for us as homicide investigators, when you're, 3 to 4 months behind the power curve, it's a challenge. Oh, yeah. So,
Yeah, that's it. Another thing too is that we try to talk about on here too is when do adult missings become something of a suspicious nature? And we try to educate people. We actually had David Hester come and do a really good thing on missings, because people get frustrated. But it was my experience, probably you all's experience too, that most every adult missing is not a criminal event.
Correct.
And that's what makes it tough. Yes. And we just covered one in Louisville where there was a little frustration over a 41, 42-year-old woman goes missing. A few days later, the car is located, and the police just called and said, come pick it up. And, could they have dropped the ball? Maybe, but like I explained to the family too, there's a fuzzy period of when you have limited resources, you have to triage just like if you went to an ER.
Sure.
And not everybody's going to be seen. And so in a case like that, you have somebody who's legally of an age to leave and whatever. But it's my understanding, talking to some of the family and friends, though, that the police did a pretty exhaustive search of that rural area. I mean,
absolutely.
And when we say rural, I'll have images on the channel, on the YouTube channel. This is about as rural as it gets. Yeah. It's enough to where your cell phone will not work down there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's down by the river.
That's it.
The Kentucky River. So it's pretty rural. And to answer the missing persons thing is, it all depends. That's probably the most appropriate answer is, we've been assigned adult missing person cases, and you'll read it and flip through it, and you're like, well, it depends. Is there a circumstance that makes me think, hey, we probably need to look at this a little closer?
There we go.
Or is it, the guy's probably had a bad day and he's out for a walk and doesn't want to talk to anybody. And we've had it from on both ends of the spectrum.
A lot of the times it's not necessarily a box that's checked on paper or an electronic report. It's you've seen enough of these, your senses kind of take over and your instincts, and you can kind of tell which ones are, well, this one I don't feel as good about. We probably need to look into this one a little bit more. And if that's a right or wrong answer, I don't really have the answer to that, because it's not a it's not a standard run-of-the-mill Scantron test where you just check boxes. It's
well put.
Yeah.
Experience, intuition, and instincts, and being able to smell that little curiosity item, which I think separates investigators who really mean business from people that are casually involved with it. So, they talked about some ground searches in a thick wooded area that. That's one thing the family was very happy about in retrospect, was they said it was exhausting.
Well, and I can, having the benefit of doing what I'm doing now, I go through some of these old case files and some that are recent. And, I know I've worked homicides to where I don't want to say I would be embarrassed, because I certainly wouldn't be, because I feel like I do the best that I can on each and every case that I've worked. But you know how it is as an investigator. Like, man, I've got to get caught up on that memo. I need to type that today.
Amen.
And some case files are, we'll say maybe the documentation wasn't the best for that time period. Amen. And then some are excellent. And I can say, just by having the benefit of seeing all these cases and working them myself, that Letha's case was worked pretty hard. Very exhaustive. There's so much documentation. It's probably one of the better situations or cases that I can, as somebody who wasn't there and did not investigate this from the get-go, that I can pick it up and be like, hey, that question was answered. This was documented. And unfortunately, that's not with every case that's ever worked. Sure. Sometimes I can go through a case file and say, man, why didn't they do this? And maybe they did. It just may not have been documented. But in Letha's case, they did a really good job.
Yeah. I'm handing it back to Lynn Thompson.
Yeah.
If you ever had it. And you could just, again, the emotional attachment, which is a big driver for most of us, is
sure.
that somewhere in there we go into that next level of latching in. So, and the other thing too is I remind people is that we're talking a long time ago, and I've been around enough to remember, and this y'all will shit, but I remember a computer on the 4th floor, and the server was in the basement where they keep all the extra uniforms and stuff, and that was Donnie Frederick and Roger Black that started. I remember one PC in the Detective Bureau. So what we're talking about is somebody sitting down in an IBM Selectomatic and hammering these out on paper with a thing, a whiteout ribbon, and putting them together. And it's long before record management systems. where you had electronic files. And I always try to, there's people I coach that are in the podcast business or they're writing books, and I'll coach them on open records, and they'll get one from back in the day and go, oh my God. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's the horse everybody was riding.
Mm-hmm.
So when you all might have a case now that's 2-3 inch binders, I can guarantee you that some of my mentors had that stuff packed up in a 1.5 inch folder, and they were successful.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
It's just a big change. But that's one thing with Letha's case that I've been grasping too, is that it was really handled as much as you could handle one in the beginning.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
well, let's go back. She's missing.
Mm-hmm.
They talking to the family and friends. They really interviewed a lot of people. Try to really get to the bottom of it. How's she found?
She's actually found by a resident who lived in that area. Gentleman was out on his 4-wheeler riding back in the woods and the area down there. There was I don't know if you could call it a junk pile. But for lack of better terms, you could kind of call it a junk pile. You know, we all know that you go around Kentucky enough, you know, and somebody owns property, if they've got a washer and dryer that goes bad or whatever, it's like, I just throw it in the junk pile. So that's kind of what it looked like. And Letha was discovered by that person riding the 4-wheeler. And then the police are called, and they come out, and sure enough, they're like, yeah, this is a set of human remains. The coroner comes out, the medical examiner's team comes out, and later on they do find and confirm that it is Letha's body.
Oh,
so,
there we go.
Yeah, and that's and initially it was, we don't know who this person is. Had an idea.
Sure.
I think it was very well noted in the case file that was the suspicion early on, was that it was Letha's body, but it was not confirmed until the medical examiner's office did dental records and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Some pretty safe assumptions in the beginning, proximity, maybe some clothing, things like that. We can always, but we always emphasize too that it ain't over till the fat lady sings.
That's right.
It's as insensitive as that might sound,
Mm-hmm.
but it has to be a firm thing. But you'd be stupid to sit and wait 12 weeks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
well,
right. Yeah.
And it goes back to intuition, experience, and a little bit of common sense. You know, this is where Letha was essentially last seen. You kind of put it together, and you're like, hey, I'm going to assume that this is her body,
Sure,
instead of sitting around, 7-10 days, 2 weeks to say, hey, yeah, sure, it's her. You know,
come back from lunch.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially that time frame of when she was missing. You know, you're already behind the power curve.
Yeah,
you know, you're talking several months now, so we're gonna assume that it's her, and we're gonna take it and run with it.
Excellent. So she's skeletal remains, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
correct.
So how's that different degrees of how we find victims, right? I mean, anything from somebody that's been dead for an hour to a long time, several months maybe. Of course, that has to be determined too. What kind of work did they do to identify her, and then were they able to come up with any causes of death, manners of death, or theories about that? So
initially, with the circumstances of how she was discovered and in the condition and the environmental conditions, the medical examiner's office actually came to the scene to help recover the remains of Letha's remains. Early on, because of environmental factors, stages of decomposition, it wasn't a clear-cut, obvious, this is her. Dental records were done by the medical examiner's office and compared to family dental records, and that's how they confirmed. Initially, the medical examiner's office ruled that the cause of death was undetermined, but given the overall circumstances of where she was found, how she was found, they did say that it more than likely was due to a homicide.
Right.
So she was her remains were actually re-examined later. That was done by the University of Tennessee. Of course, we know that the University of Tennessee they are kind of the forefront in forensic anthropology with the body farm and that sort of thing. So Letha's remains were re-examined, and the best determination they came up with was it was more than likely a sharp instrument, basically a stabbing, that was the cause of death.
Yeah, I think Dr. Bass, that's a Dr. Bass in a body farm, kind of goes into saying, based on maybe some metallic stuff or something like that. What an incredible bit of work. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
Yeah, exactly. You look at that and you're like, wow. What if somebody didn't think with that? There's the imagination again and thinking conceptually to go look at that. So,
well, I'm just glad that there's people that do that kind of work
and
have that capability and the intelligence and the experience to do it. And, it was very, it was obvious to me based on notes and correspondence between Dr. Bass and the investigators that, he kind of at that time and maybe still is the guy. He was very much the expert and was able to say, yeah, due to this metallic remnants inside of one of the bones, this is it.
Crazy.
So
crazy
it is
work.
crazy.
Yeah. And again, we're talking early 90s stuff, man, where, let's back before even DNA was like a thing. So it, that the imagination it takes to take that far is pretty incredible. So we have that information. Where does it go from there that you can talk about looking at the file? How to go after that?
Well, I think there was a pretty exhaustive effort interviewing witnesses, interviewing people that knew Letha, knew kind of who she was as a person, because victimology is a huge part of an investigation, especially in a case where a person goes missing and then they're found later on, months later. You really want to try to get to know your victim, what their habits were, who they hung out with, the people that lived in the area, and I think the investigators, they did a pretty good job checking all those boxes of interviewing people, trying to gather evidence, chasing down leads. Somebody says, hey, we heard that so-and-so knew Letha. Immediately, that person was located and interviewed. So early 90s police work, it's a lot of going out and knocking on doors, talking to people, just like it is today. But, they didn't have the benefit of computers and the internet and research and that sort of thing. So a lot of legwork, a lot of interviews, a lot of memos. And, that's kind of where the case was until, we pick it up today. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Talking to the family and friends, there's a lot of rumors and stuff. And again, here on the show, we don't track down rumors because it just it's unnecessary. And I think you informally indict people and make accusations, which I've never been crazy about. This whole business is not based on that. Moving forward, then is again, we're talking over 30 years. We're probably at the time of this recording 32 years. As people that have access to this case, and one more time, it's not pended, or it's pended in a sense that it's unsolved, but it's not code. What kind of things would you want the community to be aware of that would crack that book and make it go? What kind of stuff would you all want to look for on that?
Well, I think the biggest thing for us is, we understand that in the past there have been detectives that have investigated what we used to refer to as cold cases, and there's always been the who's who that did that work, at the police department, the Chris Schoonovers and the Rob Wilsons, and so we wanted to, since they've retired, we wanted to reinvest in those cases because they are important. Part of that is to have someone who is dedicated to be responsible for those cases, which is me, trying to get away from that negative, referring to something as a cold case, because it's not a cold case, right? It's a case that is unsolved, and that's what we're referring to them as. And my goal ultimately is to try to bring these cases up to today's investigative standards. And in the event that somebody, a witness, a relative, somebody that was involved in the case, they pick up the phone and they say, hey, I want to know about this homicide from 1985. I can go and look and I can say, oh yeah, okay, here it is. Do you have information to provide? And somebody can properly channel that and chase down those leads if they need to be chased down, and document that so that the next person that gets into that case file can basically pick up where that person left off. We've pushed for the website to be started, and that's, and again, we live in a modern age with technology and podcasts and websites, and we want to try to put out the information that these cases are unsolved, they are open. However, we do want to solve them, and we do want to give people in the community and witnesses and that sort of thing a channel to get in contact with somebody at the police department, so that I can go and I can get this case file and I can pick it up and I can see if there's something that can be worked, something added to the case file. So
good deal. Where would people find the website you're talking about on the unsolved?
So you can go to the city website, lexingtonky.gov, and you can navigate through the city's website. You can Google Lexington Unsolved Homicides, and it's the very first website that pops up. And it's a city website. It's a government website that's attached to the police department and the city's main webpage. And when you go there and you look at it, it's broken down by years. So you just scroll down. It's got a photo of the victim. You can click on that individual victim's photograph on a tile. It gives a brief synopsis of the case. Below that, it's almost set up like the Crime Stoppers website. There's actually a portal on each individual case where someone can leave information via the website.
Nice.
It can be anonymous.
Yeah.
Obviously, me as an investigator, I would love to have a name and a phone number. That way, if I have follow-up questions, usually I do. It's just our inquisitive nature, and it's part of the job. You're there to ask questions. But we certainly don't want to sway anybody from providing information. It can be anonymous. If it could be that anonymous piece of information that cracks the case wide open gets it going. So that was kind of our goal with the website specifically.
One of the resources that is being used, as soon as somebody sends the tip in through our webpage, myself, Travis, and the other sergeant in the homicide unit will actually get an email immediately once that tip is sent with everything that the tipster has sent in, all the information. So whether we're on vacation, at work, home with our family, our phone will go off and we'll get a notification email saying everything that the tipster had just sent. So it just streamlines all the information directly to us.
Yeah, we've all said that the smallest thing could make this thing just go.
Mm-hmm.
And in a case this old, too, one thing that I've always thought about from starting to look at it is that a lot of time has passed. And, for example, if people were afraid back then, they've all gotten older. Everybody's gotten older, and I think that fear dissipates a little bit, how we perceive things. So maybe people could come forward with what they have heard or what they were told, and if there's a foundation in some of the rumors, then they go. But it also too is to squash a rumor. I mean, we don't need that stuff floating around and wasting time on that too. So for our viewers and listeners, web sleuths that out there, go tear this thing up. I'll put a link on the show notes and on here on YouTube, and get there and let's smoke that website and take a look at some of these cases.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Because there's a lot of people out there that are very skilled lay detectives, as I call them, and they can get this under their nails and take a passion and share that information. If you're part of a social media group with true crime or anything like that, share this link so that other people can take a look. We live in a global community. We can't say that these things, well, that's just in Lexington, Kentucky. We know the nexus to these things can just be far-reaching, especially with a little bit of time cover in there too. So, so in the end, what would you ask people to do if you could ask the?
Well, I think the biggest thing would be that if somebody has information, obviously we want that person to come forward. We would like to speak with them. We would like to, especially me as someone who is, 30 years removed from when this occurred. There's a lot of insight that I don't have just because I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the initial investigation. We would just ask them to come forward. There's something to be said about a case that is unresolved after 30 years, because at the end of that, there's always family, there's always loved ones, friends that want closure. We as investigators, that's what we want. That's why we do what we do. We want these things to be closed, solved, bring closure for victims' families, for their friends, for their loved ones, and for the victims themselves. So we just want people to come forward. There is something to say about all those years passing. You said the fear dissipates. If something's weighing on someone's conscience, we want those people to come forward.
Yes.
At the end of the day, there's the right thing to do, and we would always encourage people to do the right thing. And the information, we want to actively work these cases. it's something that we want to
Absolutely.
get that information and pick up and run with it. It's exciting. It's exciting, like we were talking about it earlier. It's exciting to say, hey, man, look, there's this open homicide from 82, and this guy called or this gal called, and she wants to provide information. You think we could solve this? And it's exciting from an investigative standpoint to hope to bring closure for something like that. So
yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity too, just to show people that this isn't just a case file in a closet somewhere collecting dust.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's hard to see when you or you can't see anything really when you're just listening to a podcast or a YouTube video, but these cases are just as close to Travis's fingertips as a case that happened last year or 2 weeks ago. And
yes,
like I'll walk over to his desk and I'll see cases on his shelves from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s that he's continuing to work. And I think it's a good reminder for them, like, no matter what information they have, that we're always willing to listen, because these cases are just as close to us as everything else.
What a good thing to remind people of. They're not like warehoused off site somewhere
Right.
in we'd call them FR numbers on a solved cases. That, and I tell a lot of victims' families I meet doing the podcast, I said, these things are there. It was like that back in the day when I was there. There was a cabinet in the middle to where, and the whole thing is that phone call, or these days it could be a text message or a text to tip, anything like that, is it could be that simple. But that's for people inside these families that have lived this nightmare. A little bit of hope in that is that it's not off shelved anywhere. It's somewhere that somebody can grab it and immediately go to work on it. So.
And we've done this long enough that we understand that families get frustrated.
Sure.
And we empathize with what they have gone through and what they continue to go through. We share some of that frustration just kind of in a different way. So we get that. We can level with them on a human level. And also part of why we want to do this and do what we do is to bridge that gap with families of the victims, right? So we understand that their case has been unsolved for 10, 20, 30 years. And we want to develop that relationship and keep that relationship alive with someone that's in the family so that in the event we do have something that we can go on and run on and hopefully ultimately bring some closure, we've at least got a point of contact. So that's another thing I would like to add, that we would like families of these open cases that we have here in Lexington, we want to touch base with you. We don't want you to think that, you're left out in the dark. There's some of these cases that may have so much age on them that the families that are documented in the case file, they may no longer be here. They may be deceased.
Right.
So I would encourage that, and that helps me that, I've got this open case. I know I can call Dave because Dave is the surviving nephew or whatever, brother. Right. So we want to develop those relationships just to it benefits us, it benefits the victims and the families. So,
and again, there's a lot of frustration. And
sure.
It's just, but I've always said too that to get in the business that you guys are in, if you're not ready for that, then it may not be the gig that you should be in, because you got to take some of it and hopefully walk people through that pain. And again, we don't want to be in that position. But also it's a thing of I don't think there's anything that takes more effort to be patient in than that.
Oh, sure.
But it is patience in the end, walking people through that. And the only way to stay out of the dark is to stay in contact. Sure. Even when it's frustrating. Yeah. Well, good deal. Thanks again for coming. The listeners are about to hear and see more from some family and some friends to talk about who Letha was. We're going to paint a really good picture of who she was as a young woman and why there's a demand for that justice that we're seeking on that. And hopefully you all get that ding here shortly or down the road that just cracks this thing open and we get where we need to be on that. So
we hope so. I mean, it's I think Brandon will agree. It's a very, very good feeling to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, we've got an answer." Yeah. So it's
some of the best phone calls you'll ever make.
Yeah, it's great.
There we go. And again, that's what I hope people are getting from talking to people that do the work on our show is the passion that's in there. Yeah. It's real. It's not a job. It's something you love. You all, $5 says you're investigating cases and never getting paid for it because it never leaves here. You can be at a show with your family and you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Some of the best things I've ever thought about was in the shower.
Yeah.
I'll come into work when me and Travis were working together. I'm like, have we tried this? I was in the shower this morning getting ready for work. and I thought about this.
Yeah. It never leaves your mind.
No,
it never leaves
it
your
doesn't.
mind. So, well, fellas, thanks a whole bunch. Appreciate you coming and taking the time, and keep us posted. You
Yes,
know,
sir.
definitely if something shakes loose on this, is that we'll be right by you like a hot pig to cool mud to talk about how well it went. So, stay safe and
you.
keep that passion alive. So,
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.